Hello, and welcome to the MCYT Metazine. I'm Fallguy, here with Rez, whose piece is the introduction to our zine, and discusses how Minecraft roleplay is overlooked in academia. Is there any other way you'd like to introduce yourself?
No, that's pretty much it. I'm Emily. I also go by Rez. I am one of the analysis and video mods for this zine, and wound up writing what I believe has become our introduction to the zine.
That it has. So how did you decide what topic you wanted to analyze for this zine?
Honestly, it's been on my mind for a really long time, just in terms of looking at Minecraft as a medium for telling stories. I wanted to look into, are other people talking about this? Are other people doing MCYT meta on an academic level, basically, was what I was trying to get at with that. And as a bonus, a very good friend of mine is doing a thesis on a very similar topic, and I'm kind of following in their footsteps with this, but on a much shorter scale.
Yeah, but that's still very convenient.
Yeah, it was, they did help a bit with some of the research.
What would you most like people to take away from your piece?
I think the main takeaway that I want with this is something that I feel like a lot of us know inherently as members of this fandom, but that MCRP narratives are important and should get studied by actual academics and not just some guy on the internet posting things into the void on Tumblr. We can actually analyze these, and it's fun to do that. I think that's the big takeaway.
Sometimes things seem obvious in the fandom and then don't actually get studied because we all think that they're obvious. What are you proudest of in this piece?
Other than the fact that I wrote it on pretty short notice and had a really fun time doing it, I would say probably the fact that I was able to cover as many series as I did in so few words. I got a lot of mentions in there. I had professors a lot of the time who would tell me I had to keep my scope a lot smaller. If I'm gonna do more, it's gotta be about something particular and specific. I can't do all of it. You know, I can't do all of MCRP, I can't do all of video games, but I can try to get as many mentions as I can in there because I'm talking about something pretty broad in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, that's true.
I will say I'm also pretty proud that I still know how to write an academic paper.
That is a big deal. Not everyone can do that, I guarantee. Is there anything from this piece that you'll be taking with you into the future?
It'll actually probably be more of the same, just in terms of literary analysis. I'm actually working on a critique of a piece that actually came up during my research that I will be taking a lot of the stuff that I worked on through this into that. And there was also one unrelated to that, something I'm taking with me into the future for this. There was a point that was brought up in one of the papers I read that was talking about the idea of a YouTuber, content creator, as a fan of something. And it was really interesting to think about that because that is, like, ultimately the case. The whole thing about when you start making videos in a certain niche, it's because you're into that. And I guess it didn't occur to me until I was reading some actual fandom studies papers about that it clicked, you know? You have to be a fan of Minecraft to start making Minecraft YouTube.
Which makes sense, but isn't necessarily something that will cross everyone's mind, yeah.
Yeah.
So your piece was a very entertaining and thorough review of existing literature and was very fun to read. Something that I know the other mods and I really liked about your piece was that it seems to follow the conventional structure of a published academic paper. The process of carrying out that research looks to have been pretty interesting, and you've talked about a wide variety of sources within your essay. How did you go about conducting that entire part of the process?
So I talk about this pretty extensively in my literature review section. I primarily looked on Google Scholar and on ResearchGate and started by searching for relevant terms and then digging deeper. The friend who's doing their master's on a very similar subject had some previous research that I looked at and, like, doubled back to. We've sort of been recommending each other sources back and forth as this has gone on. And interestingly, I actually found some sources in the bibliographies of other sources. A couple of these papers I couldn't find on these sites. I had to dig deeper, and I actually wound up emailing a couple people to see if I could get their papers emailed straight to me. So, you know, I had this standard sort of script of like, hi, my name is Emily. I'm working on a media studies and anthropology paper about narratives in Minecraft, and I think your paper could be really useful for my research. Would be able to give me access to it. And massive shout out to Michael Dezuani at the Queensland University of Technology and Esther McCallum Stewart at Staffordshire University. who both emailed me back very promptly and sent me their chapters as best they could, despite being on opposite sides of the world. And double shout out to Dr. McCallum Stewart for wishing me best of luck on my dissertation. I'm not doing a dissertation, I'm doing a Minecraft zine, but I appreciate it immensely.
They're on the same level, I'd say.
They're kind of on the same level. I will say as well, some of the pieces did kind of annoy me because I had some pieces come up that were hits, but no actual content that I was looking for. Some of it was just like a single mention. I was like, are you serious? Come on, get out of here. And I also kind of have beef with one of the papers, but that's the one I'm critiquing, so it's fine. And I will say the one thing that got really frustrating, and I kind of mentioned this in the paper, is there's a serious overabundance of studies and papers about how video games are good tools to teach stuff to kids. And maybe it's just that I'm coming at this as an adult and as someone who has been in the fandom for quite literally half of my life, but it's so frustrating to see it and have it be like, oh, video games are good for kids and that's it. And it's like, man, come on, get out of here, you know? Other thing, I also just genuinely love writing academic papers. I genuinely have a very good time with it. Anthropology is a passion of mine and always has been. So this was just fun. This was genuinely just fun for me in the research process.
I'm glad you had the opportunity to have somewhere to publish it that's not maybe just putting it on AO3 or Tumblr. So we'd also noticed that you included a paper in Spanish, and if I remember correctly, you had someone fluent in the language help you with translation. What differences or extra steps were involved when you looked at that source compared to those written in English?
The most painstaking process with it all was just kind of getting it all through Google Translate, which isn't the best. A lot of the translation help I had was double-checking accuracy to see if phrases were correct. When you translate the title, it comes out to the epic and warlike narrative of the Dream SMP, and I asked basically if translating it as war epic would be more accurate, and was actually kind of told no, even if it sounded better in English. If I were to localize it, I probably would have changed it to the war epic narrative of the Dream SMP, but epic and warlike is what it says in Spanish, basically.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So you also talk about how little research is done on narrative, specifically in Minecraft roleplay, making it a lacking area. You sort of touched on this earlier, but did you want to go more in depth on what sorts of topics you would personally most like to see examined in an academic context?
I've got a list here, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
So, Lehren et al.'s paper talks about the plot of the Dream SMP as a hero's journey narrative, and points out Tommy as the hero specifically, and then points out a couple other characters and how they fall into certain archetypes. They mention Wilbur as the mentor, Dream as the villain, and they also specifically mention Eret as the traitor, which I was just like, oh shit, Blorbo from my show is being mentioned in this paper. They also straight up compare the server to Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, The Odyssey, and Beowulf.
Some classics in there.
So, talking about epics, talking about war narratives. In terms of this research just not being done a lot, but coming up in surprising areas, I was at a convention this past weekend and actually went to a panel about how Parkour Civilization is a great text to teach to middle schoolers for a dystopian fiction unit. And the presenter for that panel was actually a middle school teacher who, for his dystopia unit, taught his 7th graders Parkour Civilization as their text, and talked about these same hero, archetypes, talked the hero, the villain, the mentor, and then went into the concept of sidekick/henchman, which was very fun. I believe the phrase, a sidekick is just the good guy's henchman, came up during that panel. But in terms of things I'd love to see get treated with that same level of literary analysis, to the point of being able to teach that whole class, to be able to write that whole paper, and also with a specific remove from discourse, because I don't care if you want to think your character's a good person, sometimes they do bad things. I would love, personally, to see portrayal of religion in various series. This is also partially as a religious studies through anthropology studier. Discussions of misogyny and homophobia as depicted in White Pine. The mirror arcs that Zoya and Nano have in the Yogscast, Flux Buddies, and Blackrock series. Narrative foils in the Dream SMP, oh boy, are there a lot of them. A discussion of how various servers think of the concept of lives, how they explain away in-game deaths in their series. because I've seen it done so many different ways, and it's so interesting how they do that. How players organize their inventories and what it says about the servers they play on, about what their characters deem important. This could also go into analysis of ender chests as well, which could be interesting. How old Minecraft YouTube stories compare to newer stories, and how those cycles repeat. It's always corruption arcs, and it's always nukes. It is always nukes. And then the last one I have on here is a literary analysis of Mango Ball as a work of satire and how it ties into greater fandom behavior. That is mostly me talking as an anthropologist specifically. We can talk about this a little more after, but I'd love to see literary analysis of Mango Ball, you know?
That would be very interesting. I mean, all of the topics that you've mentioned would be amazing to see analysis of. And I do hope that reading this zine and listening to the creators talk about what you've all made inspires other people to hopefully pick up analysis in fandom. I think that would be wonderful to see. So you've covered a pretty extensive topic, obviously, and touched on a lot of things, as many as you could with our word limit. At least in terms of content you must have come across. At least it's very extensive. Is there anything you considered including that didn't end up in this piece?
So, I didn't get to talk about the fandom at all. Personally, when it comes to my academic career and my delves into fandom studies and general internet culture studies, that's been my big thing. My personal focus is a lot more on the fandom and about like site cultures and that sort of thing. I haven't actually done literary analysis since undergrad. I haven't taken an English class since undergrad and talked about why Guy from my book did that thing. I kind of wish I'd had the opportunity, and I mean I can on my own time, that sort of thing, talk about the fandom and how it operated, how it did things. I'm working on some stuff right now about behavior at the DSMP fandom's height, along with, again, that academic criticism I mentioned earlier, which also talked about the fandom, but talked about a very specific subset of the fandom and that fandom's culture. It's interesting. The whole thing about it is just that fandom studies is cool as hell. I love fandom studies. I love internet ephemera. My primary focus is that I am an internet linguist. So, for context, I have 2 degrees in anthropology, and my capstone project for that second degree was a 36-page thesis on Tumblr memes and how they're used to communicate in place of words a lot of the time, and how it sort of acts as a synthesis of various other memetic structures that have come up since. I love internet ephemera and the things that you can't exactly capture forever, you know? And also the other thing that I didn't exactly get to touch on but kind of did is I would love to do some sort of study on the phenomenon of how are you able to tell a story in Minecraft? Like, the question that comes up that I do attribute to a very large part of why there isn't a lot of study on MCRP, because a lot of people don't understand the media. There is kind of an inherent hurdle that you have to get over that is, they are playing Minecraft and they are telling the story in Minecraft. There's kind of an inherent hurdle there, and I'm really glad that Laurie et al. Did not touch on that at all. They do not say, sorry, it's Minecraft, by the way. They don't do that. The apologetics aren't there, and I'm very grateful for that. Like, they say, it's a Minecraft server. Anyway, there's a story being told. And I specifically bring this up because there's a pretty prominent archivist in the Yogscast fandom who does the, like, reblogs a lot of old fan art and a lot of old fan posts. And I found this one. This one came up on my dash. That was a slideshow from back in the day. I think this post is from late 2012, and it is basically an outsider's perspective of a particular series, and is like, what I know about this from what my friend has told me. This was a pretty popular thing to do back then. I was there, it was a lot. But the last slide is entirely the person making it, not raging, but being very confused, and it explicitly says, how do you make these characters in Minecraft? The last time I played Minecraft, a squid killed me. How do you create meaningful plots and stories in a world where you are made of blocks and everything around you is made of blocks? You can harvest lava, I think. I got killed by a squid. They just lay it out right there. How do you create meaningful plots and stories in a world where you are made of blocks? That, I feel, is a serious hurdle in the academia and in the fandom, and is sort of just an entry point that people find difficult to a degree. But I would love to look at that phenomenon of people saying, how do you tell a story in Minecraft when there is no plot to the game, you know?
Absolutely. As someone who I'd never played Minecraft before getting into MCYT. My friend introduced me to the Life series a couple years ago, and I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know why it looked like that. I didn't know what the things in their inventory were, and it was really confusing to just try and figure out what was going on. Obviously, they were talking, they were playing characters, and I understood that, but the first hurdle for me was figuring out the medium, because I just didn't know Minecraft. And I would argue that that is part of the hurdle, is just knowing how to play Minecraft. Not necessarily being good at it, but just having the base knowledge of how the game works is step one to understanding MCYT, and I think that often gets overlooked in analysis.
I talk about this in the actual paper, but there is a part of it that I wasn't able to really talk about I'd like to mention here. I do mention in the paper there's one interviewer who, it's a child psychology paper, actually, and the author talks about the Dream SMP in relation to a kid telling him about it, and he inherently does not understand what it is. He refers to the Dream SMP as a video game in and of itself. He refers to a couple things unique to the DSMP as features of Minecraft, and doesn't seem to understand that it's a theatrical production, effectively. And it's interesting that he is talking about this and is talking about how actually there's a lot you need to understand to be able to talk about this. Durand actually brings this up in Live Now about how there is a pretty large hurdle to entry, and that creates fandom loyalty, where you spend, you sunk cost fallacy yourself, effectively, and start talking about, oh, well, I spent so much time learning the lore, I can't just leave now. But the other thing of how do you create plots and stories where the world is made of blocks, one of the papers that I looked at and I believe talked about in this is about emergent gameplay in the Life series, and just emergent gameplay in general, and emergent storytelling from emergent gameplay, which is things happen in the game and things react to those happenings in the game. You lose your items, you have to create new items. There's a story that gets made there. A creeper is outside your door, there's a story that's made there. Grian lures a creeper over to Scar, and it blows him up, and suddenly Grian owes him a life debt. That's a story. It's that kind of thing. And it's an interesting phenomenon to look at as someone who has been in the fandom for so long and has watched as the conversations have both evolved and stayed exactly the same as they've always been. How do you make a story in Minecraft? I don't know, man, but these streamers sure are doing something about it, etc. People get so hung up on the medium that they ignore the story. White Pine could be an indie television drama, but the creators happen to have Minecraft to work with, and it gives them a lot of freedom to do whatever they want.
There are definitely a lot of benefits and new details, I think, that can come up in Minecraft using Minecraft as a medium, especially with, as you mentioned, emergent storytelling. No matter how scripted something is, it's always a little bit insecure. There's always a bit of wiggle room. Like, oh, there's a creeper that just spawned next to me that I wasn't expecting in the script. Do they leave that in? Do they edit that out? That can be very telling about a story. And of course, if they leave it in, how do they react in character in the moment?
I remember seeing this back when CC's having Tumblr was a big thing and was common and known. This was actually a thing that got mentioned in the creation of episodes of Blackrock Chronicle, which was the series that got me into MCRP. As a kid, there was actually an ask that came in to the creator Rithian's Tumblr that was like, hey, any behind the scenes stuff you want to share, how scripted is it? And Blackrock got very scripted in the latter half of the first season and then through the rest of the series. It was a very scripted, series. There was a plot going on, but it was still partially just Minecraft gameplay. And I remember him saying on Tumblr, oh yeah, we've had times where we've had to do another take because a wisp, which is a mob from Thaumcraft, was old school modded, a wisp killed one of the other players, and we couldn't keep that because he died, and that's out of character. It was that sort of thing.
I love the idea that death is out of character.
The thing about that character is that he's hyper competent and never dies.
Ah, that makes sense.
He's their bodyguard. He can't die. He can't be randomly killed by a creeper in the middle of doing something.
Yeah, that would ruin some characterization, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it just might.
All right, well, that concludes the questions that I have for you. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or any questions you had for me before we wrap it up?
It's just, this zine specifically, when I saw the concept come across my dash, I was like, I have to do something with this. I have to apply to at least see what people are saying. And then in getting the opportunity to write something for it, I was like, I gotta talk about this. And wound up kind of doing a meta piece on the meta zine, which is always fun.
It is fun to do meta in a zine that happens to be called the meta zine.
It's fun to do meta about a zine that is about meta.
Yes.
Get silly.
And of course, it's a wonderful foreword to the rest of our zine.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about the fandom's behavior. I'd love to talk more about certain... I'd love to compare Park Civ to 1984. It would be funny. At that panel that I went to, somebody straight up compared Evbo becoming the parkour champion and becoming the parkour god to the pigs in Animal Farm becoming cogs in their machine as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Perpetrating the oppression.
I could also definitely see a 1984 analysis happening, with Evo being a rather passive protagonist, and the protagonist of 1984 is also rather passive in the entire plot of everything that's happening. I could see that comparison very clearly, actually.
Yeah, part of that panel was just saying, yeah, Evbo's there and things just happen to him. And he's like, okay.
He does do that several times.
He does that so many times. He's like, damn, that guy just died. Anyway.
Time for the plot to happen to me, I guess.
Time for the plot to happen to me, I guess. Vine boom. That would be something interesting to talk about as well, the sound effects in MCYT. I know somebody else in here was talking about music, but specifically the sound effects.
That's true, because sound effects have a different effect, I would argue, than the music.
Yeah.
Music is sort of in the background. Sound effects are generally brought to the forefront, except for some background noises in the game.
Exactly.
Well, there's your next topic, too. Out of the many topics that I'm sure you would like to cover.
Out of the many. I've got so many things I want to say.
Well, write them down for later, I suppose.
I got them in a list.
Well, I've got nothing else for you, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure working with you both on the analyst end of things and on the mod end.
I mean, it's been a delight, honestly. Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me rock up here and go, hey, here's 3,000 words of the most academic thing you're gonna see today, all of a sudden.
Well, of course, it's wonderful to read academia.
I have fun with it, at least.
All right, well, I believe that means we're done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
You can check out this piece and all the other pieces for the MCYT magazine when it releases. See you then!